Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining our inaugural webinar for the Joint Bluff City Medical Society and Memphis Medical Society Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I'm Dr. Latanya Washington, the president of the Bluff City Medical Society. You are in store for a captivating discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion, on how we and our patients will benefit from this type of work. We thank all of you who have joined us via Zoom, as well as those who are watching our live stream on the Bluff City Medical Society Facebook page. We encourage you to share this so that our audience can be wider. Many questions were submitted during the registration, and we'll make every effort to answer those questions. If you have any additional questions, please enter those into the Q&A feature on Zoom or in the comment section of the Facebook live stream to further our conversation. I will now turn it over to Dr. Danielle Hassel to give our welcome.
Good evening, everyone. As the immediate past president of the Memphis Medical Society and current co-chair of this Memphis Medical Society and Bluff City Medical Society Joint Committee of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI, I gladly welcome you to this inaugural presentation. The committee was formed not long after members of both medical societies became as outraged as the rest of the country about this time, well, actually back in May of last year with the killing of George Floyd. And though it was unfortunately wasn't the only tragedy of this type or the first, both Memphis Medical Society and Bluff City Medical Society leadership wanted to take the igniting of this national crisis and bring it home to Memphis. Both societies were familiar with diversity efforts, but this committee is specifically seizing the opportunity to not only shed light on racial injustice, but also to combat the coexisting inequities in healthcare, those that span into race, gender, age, religion, and so forth. Our vision is to make DEI in the Memphis medical community a long-term component of how we address the array of challenges affecting physicians and the patients we serve. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, good evening out there, everybody. I'm Clint Cummins. I'm the CEO of the Memphis Medical Society. I'm excited to join you all tonight. Dr. Washington is going to go after me and give a history of the Bluff City Medical Society, but I thought I would put a few things in perspective history-wise from Memphis Medical Society. Dr. Hassel touched on really the most recent history, a lot of developments through our board of directors meetings, which Dr. Washington attends, and just been very excited to see those developments ultimately culminate into what we're able to discuss tonight. So I'm really excited to get into the questions later. The society, the Memphis Medical Society, was founded in 1876. We've got a long, storied tradition and history, and like a lot of organizations that are that old, there are some things to be proud of during that time, and there's some things that we might wish were a little bit different today because of what we know today about the way we should be conducting our society. So one thing I want to read straight from our website, which I think touches on our topic tonight, is the society's mission and how it's stated in the Constitution. So it says, verbatim, it shall be the advancement of medical knowledge, the elevation of professional character, the protection of the professional interests of its members, and the promotion of all measures adapted to the relief of suffering, the improvement of health, and the protection of the lives of the community. And if that doesn't hit the nail on the head about what we're talking about tonight, I don't know what does. So with that, Dr. Washington, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Clint. So I will give a brief overview of the Bluff City Medical Society. We are the premier organization for physicians of color in the Memphis metro area. We really trace our roots back to our founder, Dr. Miles Vanderhurst Link. He understood the importance of physician organizations and sharing scientific knowledge amongst physicians. As Clint alluded to, there were several organizations that would not allow Black physicians to join, most notably the American Medical Association, as well as some of the local societies. And so Dr. Link really saw an opportunity to bring Black physicians together to really help and assist others who were also African American, taking care of African American patients in our community. So that was really the founding of the Bluff City Medical Society. Also of note is that Dr. Link really established the first national medical journal for Black physicians. It was called the Medical and Surgical Observer. And he also founded a university, the University of West Tennessee, that had a committed interest to educating Black students in medicine, dentistry, nursing, and law. So when we talk about the Bluff City Medical Society, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Dr. Link, as well as so many other prominent members of our organization. I look back and smile on seeing people like Dr. Robert J. Smith and Dr. Beverly Williams Cleaves, who we've lost recently, and how they really instilled the principles of our organization. We really focus on maintaining physician best practices, eliminating healthcare disparities, as well as providing mentorship and education to students and medical trainees, and shaping healthcare policy. So that is really what we are all about at the Bluff City Medical Society. I certainly echo what Dr. Hassel mentioned about the outrage that we had as an organization and as individuals surrounding the George Floyd killing, and also just the need to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in the healthcare space, which is why we're putting this event on today. So I will turn things over to Dr. Lisa Ustan, who will do our introduction of our speaker.
Thank you. I was given the honor of introducing Dr. Alston tonight. Dr. Alston is the Assistant Vice Chancellor, Chief Director, Diversity Officer, and Title IX Coordinator at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center in Memphis, Tennessee. His employment with the University of Tennessee system spans 30 plus years, with stints at UT Martin, UT Knoxville, and UT Health Science Center in Memphis. His work experience in higher education encompasses residence life administration, student recruitment and admissions, undergraduate instruction, employee relations, student conduct administration, and equal employment opportunity, affirmative action, and diversity and inclusion. Dr. Alston is an alumnus of the University of Tennessee at Martin, earning a bachelor's in science in psychology and a master's in educational psychology and guidance. He also earned a doctorate in higher education administration from Peabody College at Vanderbilt University, in addition to a professional certification in diversity management from the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. He is a native of Brighton, Tennessee and Tipton County, and a graduate of Munford High School. He is married to Dr. Chandra Alston, who is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Human Resources at UT Health Science Center, and they have 3 daughters and 3 grandchildren. Dr. Alston will talk to us this evening about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do we really know? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Houston. And everyone, thank you and good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. What I'm going to do is go ahead and try to share my screen. I'm really a low-tech person, so hopefully I do this correctly. And then I'm actually going to have to get out of this, and actually I want to show you a video at some point that I think I already have queued up as I get into my presentation. So bear with me if I don't do this right the first time. Tell me what you see. Do you see my presentation?
Dr. Alston, we see your presentation.
Okay.
But it looks like we can see your speaker notes.
Oh, okay. So let me go back out, stop share. And here we go. I'm gonna ask the same question again, so bear with me. What about now?
We can see your presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the title of my presentation is Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. What do we really know? And so one of the things I want you to think about is when you see those words, what do you think of? Do you think of them as just being umbrella terms as it relates to how an organization is supposed to be? Does it determine how and why things get done in your organization? Does it reflect the culture, the environment that you hope for your organization to be? Well, a lot of those things actually do apply. So here's what our goals are, or points of discussion will be this evening. We're going to look at what DEI means, what is diversity, what is equity, what is inclusion, and then what should we know? So the other thing I want to say to you, if you've ever been to one of my presentations before, I'm going to apologize because I'm probably going to use some of the same information, but I may present it a little differently. I'm also going to show you a couple of videos that you may have seen, but I'm probably going to talk about them a little differently. So I just wanted you to buckle up and be prepared for that. So here we go. So what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? Again, earlier I mentioned to you that these are probably umbrella sort of acronyms. And so what I've noticed over the past few years and past few months, as I've gotten information from different headhunters across the country, is that a lot of them are looking for chief diversity officers. They're looking for chief diversity and inclusion officers. They're looking for vice presidents of diversity, equity, and inclusion, EDI, EID. And so it made me start to wonder, why are the words ordered or arranged differently for the different institutions? Is it because they're focusing on those particular items in that order? And so if you think about what was said about me earlier, and I'm over the Office of Equity and Diversity, I think I understand the history behind that, which is actually what got me to thinking about these different acronyms. And so when the University of Tennessee system first started offices like equity and diversity, they did it all across the state in each of the different UT campuses. So it was the same way at Knoxville, the same way at Martin, same way at Chattanooga, same way at Health Science Center, and also the Space Institute. And I think the reason for that was it was based on more compliance, the equity side, equal opportunities, fairness, but specifically coercive forces. Those coercive forces, something we'll talk about a little later, like Executive Order 11246, Title VI, Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, Civil Rights Act of 1964. So anyway, just wanted to bring that to your attention as to how words are sort of ordered. Do you know why your group, your merge, your collective group is called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion? And why didn't you go with the other arrangement of words? So that's just something to think about. So then what I thought I'd do is give you some definitions or share some definitions with you that I found that I sort of liked and thought would be quite vivid as it explains diversity, but it also explains what equity is. It also explains what inclusion is. And don't worry about taking notes. I shared with Dr. Washington that I would be glad to share this presentation with you, and I'll send it to her tomorrow once I take some of the notes and stuff out of it that you wouldn't be interested in having. But just look at these different definitions that are in place. And a lot of times in the middle, the one that says equity, a lot of times people sort of conflate that with equality. And they're actually different words and have different meanings in a work environment or educational environment. Equity is about giving people that have probably had obstacles in their lives or in getting to where they are, the opportunity to have the resources to be successful. Equality is about treating everybody the same. Both of them are about fairness, but equality is about everybody gets the same treatment. But we all know that everybody doesn't come to the table with the same experiences. I'll give you a great example of that. Some of you went to college and you filled out the free application for federal student aid. Some of you showed having a need for financial aid, and some of you showed not having a need. I was one of those students that showed a need. So when we think about diversity, sometimes that can be uncomfortable. It requires self-assessment. It requires correction based on those definitions that you saw. And one of the things that I would remind you of or make you aware of is there's a native Tennessean. He passed away a few years ago. His name is Dr. Roosevelt Thomas. He was considered the father of diversity management. And he coined a definition for diversity that I like and still use because it's the most simple definition you could probably remember. He says diversity is any collective mixture of differences and similarities and related tensions and complexities. Any collective mixture of differences and similarities and related tensions and complexities. So that way you don't get caught up in looking at what most of us have come to equate diversity with is race. The other piece we've come to connect it with is gender. So this is something that your son or daughter, or maybe you filled out when you went off to college, specifically if you went to any of the schools on the West Coast. It was a survey that was offered by an organization called HERI, Higher Education Research Institute. And they used to survey incoming freshmen before they actually started classes. And they asked questions about your race, your gender, your parents' educational level, income level, what you were interested in majoring in. They asked you all kinds of questions. And what that did was it was a big, long survey. And as they sort of processed all the data, they were trying to find out what were the attitudes and beliefs that freshmen entered college with for those institutions that were interested in using that survey. So they were actually looking at diverse viewpoints back then and still do today. They've changed the survey a little bit. They don't let you actually get the actual survey. It's got a big stamp on it, says for not for official use or something like that. Not that I wanted to use it for official use anyway. But we transition to the workplace and we look at the Society for Human Resource Management, also known as SHRM. So they take some of Dr. Thomas's words and they start their definition. And these are the characteristics that would probably be more vivid for us in using our imagination. They say that they define it as the collective mixture of differences and similarities that include, for example, individual and organizational characteristics, values, beliefs, experiences, background, preferences, and behaviors. So what I'm going to do is give you an example of what they just wrote from two researchers named Garden, Schwartz, and Rowe. They created a conceptual model called the 4 layers of diversity. So here's a visual representation of what I just read. So they say that our personality is in the middle. And when people meet us, they find out what our likes and dislikes are. Just like you find out what your patient's likes and dislikes are, or your students' likes and dislikes.
Dr. Alston, I think we just lost your audio.
Oh, did you?
Oh, now it's back.
Okay. It might be something going on with my cord. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So this particular model, we talk about personality in the middle, your likes and dislikes, things that people sort of see that you bring to the table every day as they interact with you. The other thing that we focus on is something they call the internal dimensions of diversity, or some researchers call them the primary dimensions. These are things that we can see and can't change about ourselves, right? The external dimensions or the secondary dimensions are those things that we can change. They're mutable, right? So we can change our marital status, our parental status, our appearance, our work experience, and so forth. And then organizational dimensions are the diversity that we sort of bring with us within an organization, depending on our work location, our seniority, and so forth. But when you think about this, there's something that happens to us as it relates to these different dimensions. Some of them have a positive impact on us. Some of them have a negative impact on us. It just depends on how we're received in the organization or the environment that we're operating in, right? So when you think about that external dimensions, it's probably the most influential piece that we experience, because within this particular circle, it determines a lot about how we're going to live the rest of our lives, who we are connected with, the kind of job we have, and so forth. It determines a lot about our Johari window, what we let people see, what we let people know about us, and also the things that we don't want them to know. So we go back to Dr. Thomas, and he said in his book, Redefining Diversity, there were 3 points. And I won't read these to you, I'll let you read them. But remember, I said that he defined diversity as being any collective mixture of differences and similarities and related tensions and complexities. Now, assuming all of you are speed readers, I'm going to say one other thing about this. If we think of diversity and we always think of differences, how does that make us come together and work together effectively? It's the people we find that we have similarities with that probably enable us to work together and be innovative and creative, correct? So I'm going to show you my first video that's actually already embedded in the presentation.
My name is Scott Page. I'm the Leonid Hurwitz Collegiate Professor of Complex Systems, Political Science, and Economics at the University of Michigan, and I'm the author of The Diversity Bonus. So 10 years ago, I'd written a book called The Difference, and The Difference was really a theoretical exercise in thinking through what the implications of cognitive diversity were for problem solving, prediction, those sorts of tasks. Companies started calling me and saying, could you come in and talk to us? And they tended to be extremely high-tech companies, so Google, Genentech, Gilead, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Ford, NASA. There are these really big thinking organizations, right? We're saying, wait a minute, we have complex problems and we're seeing in our data and our experiences this benefit from diversity. When you sort of do the mathematics, it kind of pops out. The magnitude of the bonus is just so much larger than I ever would have expected. I think because the previous book had so much mathematics in it, that biased it towards tech, finance, NASA, those sorts of places. The new book is much more approachable in creative spaces, in the design space, everything from architects to artists.
Scott Page's book, The Diversity Bonus, takes us into the heart of how people in groups, in lots of contexts, from business to the arts to science, how people problem solve, how they innovate, how they create prosperity. It's very on the ground pragmatic.
Cognitive diversity consists of things like information, knowledge, heuristics, rules of thumb, causal models, right? Frameworks. Identity diversity consists of things like race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, physical abilities, those sorts of things. And so when you think about how does identity diversity improve outcomes, it's through cognitive diversity. If I'm a 65-year-old white engineer and you're a 33-year-old African-American computer scientist, right? Our training differences will matter, but so will the fact that we've filtered our lives through our identities. It's just going to change how we see things. So let's suppose we have a group of people sitting around a table and they're trying to come up with a creative solution to some problem. Well, if you think of 10 and I think of 10, but they're the same 10, then we're no better than, the 2 is no better than 1. But if I only think of 8 and you think of 10, but my 8 are different than your 10, there's a bonus there, right? Because we're getting sort of my extra ideas. Where the second level bonus comes in is sometimes we can take your idea plus my idea and we can combine them, right? And create something new. So the idea is to shift people's frame of reference, to move away from who's the smartest person and instead think who are the people who have germane knowledge and then that might be able to add to our solution here. Some of the places that have surprised me the most in terms of where I think they've really leveraged diversity to achieve bonuses are like hospital emergency rooms. They may send an entire ensemble of doctors trained from different schools, all to look at you because they can recognize that it's complex. And when it is, they throw diversity at it.
We live in an age of uncertainty. Scott's book actually begins to outline perhaps one of the core issues for us to confront through a series of tests, through examinations, and finds in multiple settings. The more complicated the problem, the better solution that comes from having diverse teams of actors working on solutions. That's more important to me now than at any time in the last 200 years in American history.
So you know what our challenge is with that situation that we just saw? Is that we have the idea that diversity is about race and gender. Some people actually still think that. And it could be further from the truth. But where did that come from? Well, it came from some actions that were initiated or implemented by these three presidents. And I'm making an inference. And these weren't bad things, and they weren't bad guys. But we'll start with FDR. He issued an executive order that we'll look at shortly. And then behind him became Truman's executive order. And then behind him became Lyndon Johnson's years later, which was Executive Order 11246 that we know as being affirmative action. Okay, but Johnson was also attached to another piece of legislation that actually also encouraged diversity or the origin of workplace diversity in the United States. So here we go. Here are the executive orders that I'm referencing. And as you know, with President Biden being in office and President Trump leaving office, both of them were presidents who also utilized, as did President Obama, the executive order. It's an order issued by the president that has the force of law. So when you read it, Executive Order 8802, it focused on a specific race, did it? Did it not? African Americans, Blacks. Executive Order 9981. Even though that was issued, it did not have a lot of success. The Army was very reluctant to implement this. Matter of fact, Truman actually set up a task force of diverse individuals to address this particular situation. Then we have Executive Order 11246. Well, if you're a federal contractor, and you can see whoever does 10,000 or more with the federal government, you're considered a federal contractor. And then an organization like the University of Tennessee or any of the hospitals in Memphis that have contracts, you also become subcontractors. So one of the things you have to do is make certain that the people you subcontract with don't discriminate. And so what happened is, with these coercive pieces of legislation, you had a situation where people were only looking at race. But there's another thing that happened, I said to you earlier, something called the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, also known as the Hart-Celler Act. That was also signed by President Johnson. Do you know what that did? That opened up our immigration for individuals from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, as opposed to Europe. So much so that this is partly the reason why we have such a diverse country today, because we had a lot of people to come over. So we have a lot of talent to actually sort of pull from, right? If we're thinking about diversity from that standpoint. So here's another piece of information for you. When I say coercive, the EEO, or Title VII, Civil Rights Act of 1964, or Title VI, which covers race, color, and national origin discrimination, but has to do with the delivery of programs and services that are funded by the federal government. Those are things that we have to do. Affirmative action is a piece of legislation, and it says helps prevent discrimination. But everyone that's pursuing diversity as an organization, it's a voluntary kind of thing. It's not mandated. So you could say that when you think about isomorphism, so say in organizations, you have three things to consider. Was the reason for compliance based on coercion? Was it normative, or was it mimetic? And so I would say that you have two coercive points or responses because you're resource dependent. You have to actually acquiesce and come to terms with doing these legally mandated things. But the shortfall of those two pieces of legislation as it relates to an organization implementing them is it says basically don't discriminate. It didn't say do anything else. So in comes diversity, this voluntary sort of movement, normative kind of thing, and you've got to do a little bit more. You've got to massage that a little bit more. Well, the irony of that is, when you think about it, we looked at those dimensions of diversity. those coercive pieces of legislation gives protections to all of those dimensions. Title VII, Title VI, the ADA, the ADEA, all protect us from discrimination based on these protected classes or characteristics that are listed on the right-hand side of your screen. These are dimensions of diversity. Seems to be some type of disconnect, right? But we're talking about the workplace, or we could be talking about enrollments and what have you. So the other thing that I would bring your attention to is something called the glass ceiling. This is a situation where it's a real interesting history behind women entering the workforce, specifically white women and then also African-American women. When we think about the glass ceiling, we think about the glass ceiling affecting women, Black women, and men, and Hispanic men, and Asians as well. So here's the thing about that, though, is there's some people that have gone out and coined some additional terms. So glass ceiling, even though it affects everyone, you still have situations where maybe white females have actually benefited a little bit differently from their experience with the glass ceiling, because there's another term that's been coined for African-American women called the concrete ceiling, because they're only able to get to a certain level, usually the middle part of the organization. So why is all of this important? Well, when you look at organizations that are, say, federal contractors, and they have to submit information to the U.S. Department of Labor or the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, what they're looking at is to see how diverse representationally you are in the middle of your organization, but also in the top. More so in the top. Most times organizations are going to be representative of their population in the middle, but never at the top. So even for Asian individuals, there's this phrase that was coined called the bamboo ceiling. So even though those individuals may be doing extremely well within an organization, there's only so far they're able to get as well. So this is where I'm going to come out of the presentation and try to experiment with something that I've never done before. I'm going to try to show you a clip that's actually on the internet because I was not able to embed it. So I'm going to clear my screen and try to go back. Did I come out? I think I did. Okay. I think I lost myself. Okay, I found you. Okay. So are you seeing a screen that says video?
Yes.
Okay.
With a bang, energy and change came to every part of our universe. Seismic or small, it continues.
Change is all around us. We can make it work for you and your business.
Companies have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in diversity initiatives, yet roughly 85% of board members and executives are still white men. Despite our best intentions, there are still unconscious biases that make people reluctant to go against the status quo. One study looked at these biases in both controlled and real-world scenarios and found that the diversity of a candidate pool had a huge impact on who got the job. In one experiment, participants decided between 3 male finalists. If 2 were white and 1 was black, participants tended to choose a white candidate. But if 2 out of 3 candidates were black, they tended to choose a black candidate. In another experiment that looked at gender instead of race, participants had to decide between 3 equally qualified candidates up for the role of nurse manager. Even for a position that is stereotypically held by more women, participants tended to choose a man if men outnumbered women in the finalist candidate pool. You may think this is basic probability, but the numbers suggest otherwise. To confirm this, the researchers went outside of the lab and examined a real university's hiring decisions. They found that when there was only one woman or minority candidate in a pool of 4 finalists, they don't stand a chance of being hired. But that changes dramatically when there is more than one. And the difference between having 1 and 2 women seems to be what matters. The odds of hiring a woman were about 79 times greater if there were at least 2 of them in the finalist pool, and the odds of hiring a minority were 193 times greater if there were at least 2 minority candidates in the finalist pool. And this effect held, no matter the size of the pool. Having only 1 woman or minority in a pool of finalists highlights how different he or she is from the norm, and decision makers often unconsciously associate difference with risk or even incompetence. Managers need to know that working to get just 1 woman or minority considered for a position might be futile. But if they can change the status quo of the finalist pool by including 2, then diversity has a fighting chance.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to my presentation now. And you see my presentation, right? Not the notes.
We see the notes.
Oh. Okay. Now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going through that. I showed you that last year. So the applicant pools are the key to having a diverse hire, as you can see from that research presented by HBR. So now I'm going to move into inclusion, the last piece of the DEI acronym. And so it says, inclusion is a state of being valued, respected, and supported. It's about focusing on the needs of every individual, ensuring that the right conditions are in place for each person to achieve his or her full potential. Inclusion should be reflected in the organization's culture, practices, and relationships that are in place to support a diverse workforce. So what I want to focus on is basically that second sentence. It says it's about focusing on the needs of every individual employee and ensuring the right conditions are in place for each person to achieve his or her full potential. So even though this is about inclusion, it's also about equity, because what it's acknowledging is that everybody does not come in with the same experiences. They've all come in with different ways how they actually got there. What were some of the obstacles that they overcame? And so this is actually from HUD. This was on the HUD site. Now, I originally saw this definition and they added some things to it. Was on the Royal Bank of Canada's website. So that's what I used to use. And then I thought, well, you know, I saw HUD's and they said, oh, they added some things to that. But still using that second sentence, which I think is a very key piece of the whole understanding of what inclusion offers. So then the next thing I'm going to show you, and this will be the third video that you'll see on inclusion, and it's from Forward. And I think it says, and I'm going to ask you some questions when we finish this. But you don't have to answer. I'm just going to pose some questions. So the question I would ask you is, do the individuals in the organizations you work with feel respected? And how do you play a role in that? And then do they experience a sense of belonging? Do you feel a sense of belonging? And then how do you empower people to contribute to work processes? Because one of the things Brene Myers, who coined the term or phrase diversity, what did she say? I can't even think right now. Diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So one of the things she says happens is the people that aren't on the dance floor, they've either decided to just bow out voluntarily, or they just leave altogether. And so there's talent, there's innovation, there's creativity that's missed out on. And then, do individuals have a fair chance of progressing? Sort of like that video we just saw from HBR. How do we configure opportunities in the organization? And then based on the roles that we all hold, how do we make that happen? So the next question, and this is the last part of the presentation, what should we know and understand to put into practice? So basically what I've done is taken a model in education called Bloom's taxonomy. I've given you some knowledge, some information. I've given you hopefully some understanding. And so now I'm going to look at how do you apply what the little bit of information that I've given you? Well, one of the ways we do that is through self-awareness. And this is from the individuals that, this observation is from the individuals that created that 4 layers of diversity model that I showed you. They say diversity is an inside job, meaning that diversity is not about them, it's about us. Each person coming to terms with his or her attitudes, beliefs, and expectations about others. So that those expectations we have about others is essentially our unconscious bias. But one of the things we learn when we study unconscious bias is that we learn where it comes from. It comes from our beliefs, our values, our attitudes, and then ultimately our behavior. Well, we learn those things. We learn those things through socialization and experiences. We learn it through media exposure. We learn it through our family. We learn it through our school and other experiences, right? We learn it at work. So Daniel Kahneman, a psychiatrist, talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 being our unconscious mind, system 2 being our conscious mind. And for most of the time that we're living, we all have biases, but one of the things that happens, the unconscious is in control because it's looking for patterns. It's constantly looking for patterns. And so depending on whatever role we play, manager, physician, what have you, we're making decisions about people that we come into contact with, whether it's a patient, whether it's a nurse, a PA, a nursing assistant. There's something that we automatically think about when we see individuals. Now, here's another way to think about what I'm saying to you. Think about the people that you know through your work experiences or literature that you read that have the hardest time when they sort of engage healthcare services. Think about who those individuals are, their characteristics are. And if it's a bunch of them, this is what I want you to think about. If you come up with multiple examples of who has a hard time engaging healthcare services, think about the one you would least want to be out of the people that you've thought about. The individuals you would least want to be that engage the healthcare services that you're a part of. And then think about why you would least want to be those individuals. It's because you've noticed something about their experiences. And a lot of hospitals and healthcare organizations have created positions for people that deal with health equity concerns, not people that do what I do. This is a separate job, right? I think LaBonner has someone that is the vice president for health equity. And they're interested in how that interface takes place. So there was a lot of questions that were posed tonight. So some of the things I tried to put into this presentation actually was sort of preemptive of some of the questions that I saw that were shared with me. But just think about that. Of the people that you know engaged in healthcare services, which ones would you least want to be? So then, as we think about how we interact with patients, and I think about this as when I interact with people like you, healthcare delivery professionals, what are some of the things that we sort of display when we engage or interact with patients. Think about our perceptions, our attitudes, our behaviors. Are we really listening? I read this research article by this lady named Susan Fisk, I think. And she was saying within the first 12 seconds of a patient visiting a physician, they interrupt them. Now, if the goal of the goal of communications is to inform, influence, and express feelings, maybe the first 12 seconds, and I'm not saying any of you do that, but maybe the first 12 seconds isn't the best time to interrupt that person. But here's the other thing. There's an anthropologist named Arthur Kleinman who created this patient explanatory model that allows the patient to sort of explain to you what's going on with them in their own words. There's a couple of other models out there called the BATH model and the LEARN model and so forth. And so some of you asked what would be some things that maybe students could learn in their curriculum. Maybe those things are already being taught. I've mentioned those sort of models before, and when I've done some grand rounds presentations and nobody was familiar with them. And again, maybe that it's because they're probably used in other healthcare disciplines and not medical education disciplines. But one of the things I want you to remember as we look at this particular slide is we all have triggers for our unconscious biases. When the evidence is ambiguous, when we're experiencing some type of complex decision, cognitive overload, and again, there's nothing wrong with unconscious biases. We all have them. So I'm not trying to shame anybody or make you feel bad. The other thing we have is a fear or threat that we're dealing with, or we're short on time, or maybe we're just tired and we have low blood sugar or whatever. Here's the other thing I want you to think about. We looked at that video that talks about how people are hired. So when you're interviewing students or you're interviewing residents, is it better for you to interview those individuals in the morning, afternoon, or evening? Here's why I asked that question. Which time of the day are they getting the best you? Because if they're not getting the best you, what they're experiencing when they engage you is probably some type of bias that's going to affect your decision about whether or not they get in or whether or not they progress. So the last video I'm going to show you is dealing with microaggressions, and it's not in a healthcare setting, it's not in a work setting, it's more to do with how sort of faculty may sort of interact with the student. And then I also have an article that I downloaded that might be of interest to some of you. It's called Commit to Confronting the Microaggressions That Are Affecting Your Learners. And it was written by two pediatricians, I think at maybe the University of Utah or the Utah maybe Academic Health Center. I can't remember the exact place where they work, but here we go. This is from the movie Finding Fortune.
I'm sorry, sir. I don't.
You, of all people in this room, should know who wrote that passage. And do you know why, Mr. Coleridge? I repeat, do you know why?
Just say your name, man.
Excuse me, did you have something to contribute, Mr. Wallace?
I just said that you should say his name.
And why would it be helpful for Mr. Coleridge here to say his name?
Because that's who wrote it.
Very good, Mr. Wallace. Perhaps your skills do extend a bit farther than basketball. And now, if we can turn to... You may be seated, Mr. Coleridge. Turn to page 120 in the little blue book that I'm certain...
Further.
I'm sorry?
Don't.
You said my skills extend farther than the basketball court. Farther relates to distance. Further is a definition of degree. You should have said further.
Are you challenging me, Mr. Wallace?
Not any more than you challenged Coleridge.
Well, perhaps the challenge should have been directed elsewhere. It is a melancholy truth that even
great men have poor relations. Dickens.
You will hear the beat of a horse's
Kipling.
feet. All great truths begin...
Shaw.
Man is the only animal
that blushes. Or needs to. It's Mark Twain. Come on, Professor Crawford.
Get out. Get out.
Yeah, I'll get out.
So what happened there? Some assumptions were made about that student. He actually came there because in the movie, he had scored really high on some tests at his public school, and the guidance counselor and the principal at his public school thought he would do better at this school called Mailer. Well, it just so happens he was a really good basketball player, but nobody really knew that he was smart. So that professor thought he was there. He made some assumptions that he was just there to play basketball. But what he also didn't know is Sean Connery's character was this reclusive writer that Professor Crawford was really high on and talked about all the time. Well, he was also mentoring Jamal in this movie. So it's a really great movie, but what you saw there was basically a great example of bias. He made some assumptions about this student that he didn't really know anything about. But what were the patterns that he found throughout his life that brought him to the conclusion that, oh, this guy's just someone here to play basketball? He never got a chance to take the chance to know him. And I think that's one of the things that, I was talking about earlier. When we think about diversity, we always think about differences. What if we identify those similarities that we have with people, right? So one of the things Howard Ross talks about in his book that came out a few years ago, Everyday Bias, he talks about this model called pause. And he does a lot of stuff with the AMMC and has I think a certificate program, or his company called Cook Ross. He's no longer a part of that company. Would go around and teach different medical schools or faculty. And they also had a product called Culture Vision that a lot of hospitals and health systems actually purchase. But he said we should go through this particular exercise right here when we see something going on, and maybe we think a little bit slower about what's happening before us. Think the opposite. Take time out and just slow down. Are there other possible reactions or interpretations or judgments that may be possible? And I find myself doing this because I have a very young staff and they want to do these different things. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but what I do know is that if I kill their enthusiasm, there's no prosthetic to actually replace that. So I just try to give them some tips on how maybe it could be better. Again, I don't really know, but I'm not trying to work from my bias when I say that. I'm truly trying to dive in and be supportive of them. So one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about is this is the Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan. And one of the things that he talked about is sort of a spin on the Brene Meyer's maxim that I shared earlier: diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so he actually put equity in the middle. But when you think about the inclusion aspect, when you read all three of these, inclusion means or infers that someone's got to give up some power for this to happen, right? Because we're trying to say that you have a seat at the table now. So everybody has an opportunity to dance, but they also have a chance to say, this is how it's going. And so how do we get to that? How do we as individuals help our organizations that we're affiliated with get to this? Thank you.
So I would like to thank Dr. Alston for his presentation. It certainly brought a lot of topics to light. I think we all learned a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, some things that we didn't know. So we have a lot of questions that were sent in. Some of the topics Dr. Alston covered in his presentation, and Clint is going to be going over the questions. We have a couple in the Q&A section as well, Clint, so I will let you kind of take the charge there.
All right, thanks, Dr. Washington. And I put it in the chat earlier, but there are 2 UT Martin graduates on this panel here. So Dr. Alston, I'm there with you. It's rare to have 2 of us on a call like this. So forgive me for that shameless plug for our university. So I'm actually going to go to the Q&A first because it captures at least one of the questions that we received in advance. And I'm a lover of technology. This one came all the way from New Orleans. Dr. Bob Manuel. So thanks for putting that in the chat, and thanks for joining us tonight all the way from New Orleans. The first question was, how do we encourage a medical program to appreciate diversity and the benefits it brings to the workplace? And the medical colleges in places that are at best lukewarm to these issues. And it's kind of a two-part question. And so then what are the active steps that we can take towards recruitment of diverse workforce in medicine, including purposely improving minority student scores on board exams and actively going after a diverse qualified applicant unapologetically?
So I think, one of the things I was saying earlier is you're an organization and you have a strategic plan. And hopefully within that strategic plan, you've defined what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like for you. So then at that point, there's some accountability measures that you want to put in place for the individuals that are responsible for making that happen. And so I think it's not one person's job, it's a collective of individuals that have to sit down. And so one of the things I know that a lot of organizations or colleges and universities are doing is they actually have committees that work together to sort of identify this. And these are the people that have germane knowledge of what's going on in their individual programs. So I think you make goals, but you also focus on what the best practices are. And then however diversity is defined for your particular college or university, that's how you go. But I think there's some factors you have to consider. You need to have data on who's actually interested in your program. So I did undergraduate recruitment for about 10 years. And so one of the things I know that rings true for colleges and universities around the country, even at the graduate level, is there's this concept called reach, level, and safety. And so as students are applying for college or medical school or pharmacy school or PT school or what have you, they're not just applying to one place. They're applying to a safety school, which would be a school that has standards that are actually lower than what they have as an academic profile. So that's their safety school. They're pretty sure they're going to get in there. They also have their level school or their target school. This is where they actually match the academic profile of that institution. And then they have their reach school. This is their pipe dream school. This is where they want to go, sort of like Vanderbilt was for me to get my doctorate. I didn't know if I was going to get in there, but I was going to do everything I could to do it. So where are we in that reach, level, and safety of the kinds of students that we're recruiting? Meaning we need to know what students would be the better ad and most likely to model enrollment should we offer them an admission letter. Which ones are most likely to matriculate? And this is what undergraduate campuses go through. Graduate schools are going through this right now because there's a lot of competition out there. And then the other aspect is, how does your scholarship program look? And are you able to consider need when you're awarding these students? Well, one of the things that makes it a little different than the undergrad is, and I've always argued for this kind of formula or submitted this as an idea. When we go to school, we all submit the free application for federal student aid. Well, maybe we all don't. But what they do is they process that and they come up with a EFC code, expected family contribution. So if you go to undergrad in all 4 years, your EFC says your parents can only pay this amount for you to go to school. Whereas if you come from a more affluent home, they can pay this amount for you to go to school. So what happens is on your financial aid transcript, this is my concept now. It should show when you get ready to go to medical school or graduate school or what have you, you have a history of need. So there's no reason you have to prove that, even though at the time you graduate from college, you may be emancipated from your parents, but you can deliberately show you have a history of need. So there should be some type of strategy that colleges or medical schools, pharmacy schools, and what have you could utilize to say, hey, this person shows a history of need. Socioeconomic status is also a diversity characteristic. So that's one of the ways you can do that. But I think the best ways to do it is you also need individuals that look like the students that you're trying to recruit. Because otherwise, you're going to have a hard time helping those students sort of experience academic integration, but also social integration.
So one of the other questions kind of flips the one that we just asked and really talks about the faculty side of things. So hiring more minorities in faculty seems to be a weakness at some universities. Are there some successful strategies out there that you're aware of?
Yeah, there's some programs out there at the University of Michigan called Advance. It's where they take their faculty search committees through unconscious bias training. It's real comprehensive. The problem with it is it's used at Knoxville. We haven't used it here, and one of the reasons I don't know if it's. I guess I would be the one to bring it here, but I think one of the things that sort of affects how we would possibly use it in, say, all of the particular colleges, but specifically medicine, we have to figure out when we have faculty that are split between the hospitals, the partners, and the institution, how does that work? Because I think our timeline may not be as quick as the partners' timeline in hiring folks. And so we're a little slower because we're a government agency and there's some checks and balances that we have to, but I think there's a way to work around that. And one of the things that I noticed just the other day is that Le Bonheur is actually hiring someone in the role of a senior director of equity and diversity or something like that. So I think as more organizations normatively decide to hire people that focus on the things that I focus on comprehensively for the institution, and you have the different committees that you're putting in place, I think there's a way for all of this to actually be implemented, but it's going to require a lot of working together, but a lot of creativity, which is, again, what you get when you have a diverse workforce, is you figure out how to make all that work. So, but going back to the video from HBR, I think you also have to have diverse committees, search committees, and you have to commit to having a diverse applicant pool. And think about it this way. If you're trying to hire someone that is a unique individual that would bring diversity to your institution, chances are there's a lot of other folks trying to hire them. And so this brings me back to the whole acronym. Which one of those words would be better first? Would inclusion be better first, and equity second, and then diversity? But see, I think the inclusion should be first, because in order to have the other areas, equity and diversity, to sustain it, you need a culture, an organizational culture that acknowledges that everybody's important and everybody has a seat at the table. And so that's why I was saying earlier, different organizations are in different places and emphasize things differently. And so I think that is something that, I had a conversation with our chancellor a few weeks ago, and I mentioned that I think I'd like to do a name change to my office, and I'd like to put inclusion first. There's another office on our campus that works with students, and inclusion is actually last on theirs. So again, that was a long answer, but I think there's a lot of things that have to be in place. And again, accountability of those individuals that are responsible for sort of spearheading the whole hiring process for their particular organizational units is the critical piece. Y'all still here, or did I go off?
No, we're still on. I think that it looks like Clint maybe dropped off, and I'm not sure what happened there. But let me see if I can get the questions pulled up here and we can continue on with the questions. There was another question in the chat that says, this presentation focused on diversity and equity in organizations. What should doctors know about these areas when it comes to treating or caring for patients? And what should we as doctors know about the social determinants of health?
So, not being a physician, it would probably be hard for me to answer this question, but I have been a patient. And so I think when I mentioned those patient explanatory models and the fact that, when everyone comes into a situation where they're interacting with each other, we all have a communications goal. And so I think the most critical piece for me as a patient when I'm interacting with someone like you all is, listening to me. and you're taking into consideration the perspective that I'm bringing to the table. Because here's the thing that I know. I don't know what you know. I only know what I think is wrong with me and what I'm experiencing. And so I think that's the critical piece is just the listening aspect of what you do. And then perhaps something we talked about a while back around empathy and Daniel Goleman talking about the 3 different types of empathy. I think those things go a long way as well.
Okay, one of the other questions that we had that was sent in, the time from residency to practice represents the largest drop in the number of physicians of color. What steps are being taken by the institution to address this educational disparity? How will you gauge experiences of residents of color and attrition? And how can programs be held accountable for not addressing factors that lead to residency attrition?
So I think on our campus, GME is addressing this because I think ACGME has come down with some guidelines and expectations. And I know that they also have a body that focuses on diversity and inclusion because one of my staff members is a part of it. And I can't think of the name of the actual body. But I also think that some of the departments have actually reached out to me when they've had diverse individuals apply or interview. They've asked me to contact them as well as being someone on campus in an office that's focusing on this. So I think, again, it's a collective effort. And I think by putting those individuals that are on that committee together and thinking about their ideas and what they experienced when they went through residency. But the other thing is offering those residents an opportunity to express what they're experiencing is key. Surveying is key, whether they want to do that anonymously or whatever. But I think you have to open up opportunities for people to voice what they're experiencing. And so I think those are things that we even do for our employees or are looking to implement even more so. It's just making sure people feel safe coming forward. It's kind of like one of the questions that was asked that was sent to me, how do I respond to microaggressions? And so the reason I showed the video clip of the student at the end was because he had to make some decisions. Does he confront this professor right now, or does he do it later? And so I think those are a lot of things that students and residents ask. And then another thing that we try to do in the Office of Equity and Diversity is we've been offering a lot of training classes. We have a diversity certificate program, and we break these topics out into smaller topics. And they're not just taught by everybody in my shop. We have people from across the organization that teach conflict resolution, microaggression, stereotypes. And so I think those type of soft skill kind of things need to be offered to our residents, but also our faculty and staff. And that's why I mentioned the article called Commit to Confronting the Microaggressions That Are Affecting Your Learners. I think, but again, all the training in the world is not going to matter if there's no accountability. So somewhere along the way in performance evaluations, in goals that are set for faculty and staff, and then through the feedback that you get in those evaluations, they have to mean something. And so, and then that way that person knows that once that information comes in, they're being held accountable for doing better, to being more civil in the work environment or classroom environment or clinical environment.
Yes, I did want to make a comment. So that article that you mentioned, I did link that in the chat. So for those who are attending, you can check out that article in the chat. And then I will also comment that based on the work that the ACGME is doing, I know that they are working on collecting the data, because for many years there has not been a good data collection around it, surrounding resident attrition. And I think that they're working to get that information so that they can utilize it. And I know that there are many people who are working on that currently. Let's see here what other questions that we have. So one of the questions was, do people of color receive more equitable care from physicians of color?
That would probably be a question that I cannot answer.
There was a recent article that has been published about physician and patient racial concordance, and it did suggest that when in the NICU, when both the patient and the physician were African American, that those patients had the best outcomes for patients in the NICU. And so that's an article I will try to look up, and I'll drop that link in the chat as well. And then Clint, I see that you are back with us. Do you want to kind of take over the questions again?
Yes, I will, and I apologize for that. Just another snowy day in Memphis to lose your internet access. Hopefully I'm roughly in a good place with this next question. We had several. So what are some productive ways, Dr. Alston, to increase what the question asker calls buy-in from individuals who claim these issues are not important?
I think, again, I would go back to typically when an organization creates a job and they grade that job, there's three things they look at if they're using this Hay classification system, which is a compensation system. They look at the know-how, they look at the problem solving, and the accountability of the person. So we think about what is the reach of that person that has this viewpoint, meaning what are they being held accountable for? So I think that's the one thing you have to look at is how you address that. If they see something going on and they don't believe that it's problematic from what the values are for that institution, whether it's something that is in violation of how people should be respected or types of civil interactions that have been defined in the policies and procedure, then the other question would be, what is the position that this person holds? Because here's something that I can say from my side of the fence. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is a place where people go to file complaints if they're employees. And so one of the things that the EEOC outlines on their site is something called vicarious liability. So if you're in a situation where you manage people and you're responsible for evaluating them, or you provide work direction, you're considered to be the institution, because the institution's vested some type of authority in you to sort of affect how that person experiences the institution. Because again, you're providing work direction, you may likely be able to take some type of tangible action against them. You may be able to discipline them, you may be able to terminate them. So the vicarious liability comes in is when they make you aware of something that's in violation of the university's policy or practices, then what happens is, if you do nothing, you're again representing the institution. The responsibility is imputed upon the institution because they put you in this role. So I think holding individuals accountable that may have this viewpoint, and again, it doesn't really have to be a situation where they're a manager or a supervisor. If they're a faculty member, they still have a responsibility under different policies that are in place in organizations to move things forward or to report. So I think that's the key right there, is making certain that everybody's clear on what they're accountable for.
So another good question that we got is, if you're in a workplace, or really any other situation for that matter, where there's no diversity, equity, and inclusion committee or similar group, what can you do? How do you get started?
So there's some, who was it? I was reading something by Microsoft, and they were talking about allies and what is an ally. Well, an ally is a person that sort of has privilege and they're able to act on it when they see something wrong happening. So just because there's not something in place already, whether you're someone that has the privilege that, say, an ally might have based on how I just described it, or even if you're not someone that has privilege, there's always a way to get something started, whether it's sponsored directly by the institution or created by the institution. There's something in organizations that a lot like FedEx, American Express, Accenture, Royal Bank of Canada, they have what they call employee resource groups. And that's one way to get that started. And we have a few of those on campus. It was something that we sort of rolled out several years ago and tried to sponsor, but a lot of our employees didn't bite. But what we saw the value in them being is that when you have individuals coming to interview or look at maybe kicking the tires at UT Health Science Center, maybe you want to allow them to meet individuals from these different resource groups, because think about it. When we are trying to hire people from other organizations, we don't know, unless we go out and look, what they're coming from. Where were they on that scale, meaning that company they're coming from as it relates to DEI? What were some of the things that they were doing? So they may be really interested in getting involved from that side of their employee experience, in addition to the main reason why they're coming, the primary reason why we're trying to hire them. And so, that's their work-life balance, or that's something that they want to do from a service standpoint, or maybe it's just something that they want to do as an employee. And so I think looking at the opportunity to create resource groups, creating sort of a listserv, or just going to your HR department and seeing what the options are, seeing what people are open to, seeing what your supervisors are open to sponsoring, see if an executive within the organization is willing to sponsor you. So say on our campus, there's a women's resource group. My wife, Dr. Chandra Alston, sponsors that group, and they do a lot of cool stuff. They did some Healthcare Heroes care packages when the first few months of COVID. We went out to Methodist and took a bunch of supplies, Methodist Germantown, and I think of one of the other locations. And so that was something that was done by that particular resource group. So there's a lot of options that are out there. And one of the best ways to know that is look at what other organizations do. We look at that all the time to get ideas about what's the next thing that we should be doing in this space, as well as what the literature is saying.
So the other end of that spectrum, unfortunately, can be, you get something started, you get the conversation going, you even get some formality with committees and whatnot going, and you unfortunately have to deal with some backlash. What advice do you have, or how do you address and prevent backlash when you actually do speak out and have the courage to do something?
I think not knowing fully what that means. I think the other thing, though, is if you've got sponsorship from a senior administrator, what I would do is whoever's sponsoring you, if you've gone that route, is to talk with them about it. But here's the other thing that I'll say. If what you're doing, it connects to the strategic mission or strategic plan of the organization, and you haven't heard from the people that would say you can no longer have this group, I think it would be something you want to address, but I think you should keep moving forward, because at the end of the day, again, as I said earlier, we all have our biases. I have it every time one of my staff members comes to me with an idea about how to do something. But guess what? I'm not the end all be all. I don't know everything. And so one of the things I try not to do is again, kill that spirit, because to take a line from Sin of a Woman with Al Pacino, there's no prosthetic for a broken spirit. And so I try to figure out, well, how can I best help them? Well, the reality of the matter is we're not always going to have people within an organization that feel that same way. And for whatever reason, they're going to be naysayers. But I think you just keep moving it forward by talking to the people who you found to be the resources in the drive that you're trying to accomplish. And I think if you don't hear anything that says cease and desist after that, you keep going. There's some things that we've implemented over the years in my office that I've worried that would not be accepted. But at the same time, these are things that people are doing at other institutions. Why wouldn't we want to do them here? It's not that they're inappropriate or offensive. They may be uncomfortable, but I would call that progress, because again, we're trying to move the needle from where we are. We can't run in place forever. And one of the things I learned a long time ago when I got into this work, some steps may be giant steps, but there's going to be a lot of small steps. And I'm willing to take those small steps to get there. And I think that's what they should actually focus on as well. As long as no one told you to cease and desist. And then even if they do, find another path to do it.
What a question that I get a lot, frankly, from folks in the medical community, and I think this is a society-wide issue as well, is those, and forgive the lack of polish on the question, but those white folks who are empathetic and genuinely want to actively participate in a positive way in this conversation, what advice do you give to them? Because what I hear is, I'm a white male, for example. I don't know where my place is. I don't feel like I should be leading out front because that might be interpreted in a way that I don't want it to be interpreted. So where's my place? How do I engage in all this?
So again, I go back to the being an ally, is that you realize as a white male, you have some privilege and some advantage. So how can you have a conversation with the individuals that are affected that best supports them? And so I think that's the critical piece right there, is what type of dialogue has taken place between you and the affected individuals. Remember, I said earlier, the goal of communications is to inform, influence, and express feelings. And so I think that's the critical piece in the whole equation, is if you want to be involved, well, what's the best way for you to be involved? And then based on what you come up with, if you didn't get the input of the individuals that have been affected, how would you know that that's what would be accepted if it's in a way to support them? So I think you want to have those conversations, but it should never be a situation where the affected individuals are sort of teaching you how or teaching you more about what they've experienced. But I think, how can you help them by elevating through your privilege and advantage the issue and things that they're experiencing? And hopefully I said that in a way that is understandable.
So a little bit along the same lines, and this is more specific to the university, what types of bias training is being offered by the university to medical students? Are you aware of that?
I don't know that we've done with bias training for some of we do the first year dental students. We do like a module with them, and we haven't since COVID, but we do all of the first year dental students. We cover cultural competence, unconscious bias, boundaries, and emotional intelligence. We've done some of the pharmacy students. I think right around the time that we probably talked about doing something with medicine is when the executive order came out with President Trump. And so a lot of that kind of training was, kind of halted. And so I don't think it's something that they're not wanting to take place. I think it's basically a situation where finding the time. And so sometimes we would actually introduce that during orientation, like I would do with the residents. One of the other ways we've done it with residents is through grand rounds. And I think a lot of it just depends on scheduling. But I think in working with Dr. Womack and Dr. Witt, I don't think it's something that they would not want to happen. But I think the other thing is, if we do it, we want to do it in a responsible way. It shouldn't be something that's quick. You'd want the people to take the IAT, talk about what surprised them about their scores, and do some other things like that. We also have a program called the Diversity Passport Program, which a lot of our students have gotten involved with. We actually designed it so that students would be able to participate, even though they're still taking school classes in real time. So I think it's a balancing act, and it's probably something that we'll probably try to work with Dr. Shepard and some of the others in the College of Medicine to see how we can actually do that a little bit better. And it may be some recorded lectures that we could actually utilize, but it's not something that's off the radar.
And this will probably be our last question. And Dr. Washington may be able to help answer this one, but a couple different people ask about, training and giving exposure to those in middle and high school who are, from African-American communities, diverse communities. Are there any specific programs from the university? I want to say Bluff City has participated, if not outright run one in the past, but can y'all speak to that a little bit?
So a few years ago, what we realized at UTHSC was for students that are under 18, having them on our campus is a risk because we're not a traditional college campus, say like UT Martin, UT Knoxville, UT Chattanooga, University of Memphis. And so because of the way our campus is set up, what that means is there's a duty of care to be with those kids all day. And so when we took over in equity and diversity, the TIP program, which has actually been redesigned and it's in another office now, that was some of the things that we looked at. We looked at just doing TIP as opposed to doing the high school program. So one of the things that we also talked about was maybe doing or creating some type of weekend programs for high school students that talked about what I mentioned earlier, reach level safety, the predisposition stage, the search stage, the college choice stage, just helping them prepare for college and things that they would actually experience. There's another organization in town that does a great job with that, and they do summer programming with the students, sending them to different places around the country. It's called Reach Memphis. But as far as healthcare specific, we don't have anything in place right now for that, because again, the way our campus is set up, it's probably hard for us to have individuals who are under 18 to be on campus, because there's a situation where you need to do a lot of background checks and make sure people are safe to work with those people, but you also have to make sure that you're accountable for those kids at all times while they're on your campus.
So I'll make a brief comment about that. So with the Bluff City, we don't have a specific pipeline program, but the National Medical Association, which is our parent organization, then they have the Student National Medical Association, which is the student organization, and then they have the MAPS chapter, which are the undergraduate chapters of students that are interested in health professions. So there is an affiliation there, but there is no defined pipeline program. I know that some institutions do have those, but I don't believe that there are any institutions that are in the Memphis area or that are specifically affiliated with UT that do that.
So we're running on time here. Before I hand it back to Dr. Washington, I do want to note that she is some sort of savant in the chat with a lot of different resource links in there. So I encourage everybody to look at those. I'm sure we'll find a way to share those again after the event, but a lot of good reference articles in the chat. So I encourage everybody to look at that. Dr. Washington, I'm going to let you close this out.
Yeah, so as everyone can see, this is a topic that we can talk about for many, many hours. It's very difficult to compress everything just into an hour and a half. And so we appreciate Dr. Alston for providing his expertise. I'm sure that we will invite him back to talk to us a bit more. I do really appreciate that. And then at this time, I am going to transition over to Dr. Michelle Kitson, who is the president-elect of the Bluff City Medical Society, and she is going to give closing remarks. Dr. Kitson, you're on mute.
Okay, then that would help. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for introducing me, Dr. Washington. I do want to close out this evening by saying thank you to all who have joined us tonight in the inaugural webinar presentation on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The question being, what do we really know? Presented by the joint Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committees of the Memphis Medical Society and Bluff City Medical Society, of which I'm a proud member of both. Our knowledge base understanding of the topic at hand was enhanced brilliantly by our esteemed presenter, Dr. Michael Alston, to whom we extend our gratitude. We thank Drs. Hassel, Washington, Cummings, and everyone who submitted questions to the panel this evening. We look forward to welcoming you back to our next installation. Both the Memphis Medical Societies and Bluff City Medical Society are committed to ensuring that the local medical community remains engaged in improving the training of and care delivery to the stakeholders in said community. Thank you so very much. Stay warm, stay safe, and we look forward to the next installation of this very, very important and vital discussion. Good evening.